This is True Crime Nightmare. My name is Jane Reed. This is episode 26. This is the case of Suzanne Capper, who was a 16-year-old girl. She was brutally tortured over many days before being murdered. The murderers were 6 of her so-called friends. The murder took place in 1992 in Manchester, England. Suzanne Capper was only 16 years old when she was tortured over a period of 7 days after being tricked by her so-called friends. After she had been beaten and repeatedly tortured, details of which I'm not going to go into in any great detail. But if you want to look them up, please be advised that the details are pretty horrific. She was set on fire and left to die in the end. Suzanne Capper fought to stay alive, but finally she succumbed to her injuries. She died on the 18th of December of 1992 from multiple organ failure after suffering up to 80% burns to her body. Suzanne had been in the hospital in an induced coma for 4 days prior to her death. Suzanne Jane Capper was born in January of 1976 in Manchester, England. Her father had walked out on her mother, who was called Elizabeth, before Suzanne had even been born. Suzanne had an older sister called Michelle. Suzanne Capper would later be described by those that knew her as a, quote, gentle and easily influenced girl, unquote. She lived for a while with her mother and later her mother and her stepfather John. Elizabeth and John divorced when Suzanne was only 14 years old. When her parents separated, Suzanne spent time in local government care. After a while, Suzanne left care and, along with her sister Michelle, went to live with her stepfather. It was at this point that Suzanne Capper began missing school. She would play truant on a regular basis. Despite the fact that it was known that Suzanne had a troubled childhood, the school did not seem to check on the fact that she was missing a lot of school. Her attendance at Moston High School in Manchester was described later as erratic. Suzanne was missing a lot of school so that she could spend more time with some new friends of hers that she had only just recently met. The main friend being Jean Powell, who at the time was 26 years old and already had 3 children. Jean Powell lived at 97 Langsworthy Road in Moston, Manchester. Suzanne Capper only lived a short walk away at this point at Bewley Walk with her stepfather John. Suzanne would sometimes babysit for Jean Powell. The house that Jean Powell and her 3 children lived in was described as squalid. Jean Powell was on friendly terms with a woman called Bernadette McNeely, who also had 3 children. She lived at 91 Langsworthy Road, but would, along with her 3 children, eventually move in with Jean Powell and her 3 children. Jean Powell was married to Glyn Powell, but they had separated, but remained on pretty friendly terms. Bernadette McNeely had a boyfriend called Anthony Dudson, who would often visit 97 Langsworthy Road. Jean Powell had a boyfriend called Geoffrey Lee. He would also spend a lot of time at the house. Another regular visitor was Jean Powell's younger brother, Clifford Polk. These 6 people would all go on to torture and eventually murder Suzanne Capper. The group were known to treat her badly and would often bully her, but she always went back again. Suzanne's sister Michelle tried to stop Suzanne from seeing them, but she was unable to. Suzanne's stepfather John also tried to stop Suzanne from being involved with the group, but again Suzanne kept on seeing them. Suzanne just seemed to put up with the bad treatment that she received from her so-called friends. Suzanne had always wanted affection and liked to try and please people. She had not received the best support from those closest to her when she was growing up. And even though she was still very young, she was about 14 years old when she first became friends with Jean Powell. She was able to come and go as she pleased, it would seem anyway. Suzanne wanted company and someone to care about, according to those close to her at the time. Suzanne Capper did not know her father and did not have a very good relationship with her mother at times. She did have a fairly good relationship with her sister Michelle, though. Suzanne also got on well with her stepfather John. It would appear that John did try his best to look after his stepdaughter. I think that it is telling that Suzanne went to live with him for a while after his mother had separated from him. Suzanne's mother was not considered to be a particularly good mother by all accounts and had many problems of her own. Suzanne also went to her mother for help after she had been beaten up by Jean Powell, but her mother had recently moved in with a new boyfriend. She asked Suzanne to wait a few weeks until she was able to sort something out. This led Suzanne to go back to Jean's house. Maybe if she had helped her more, things would have been different, or maybe the crimes committed against Suzanne would still have happened. Regardless, who knows for sure. Jean Powell had many problems, which included not only taking drugs but also dealing drugs as well. Jean lived with her 3 children who were very young. Jean herself was still only 26 years old. They all lived in a house that was extremely run down and needed a lot of work doing to it. Add to that Bernadette and her 3 small children moving in as well. You can just imagine how bad things were at the house. There were people coming and going all the time. The neighbours knew that all was not good at the house but did nothing to intervene. Bearing in mind that there were so many really young children living there in such squalid conditions and people coming and going at all hours of the day and night, it is sad that no one stepped in to try and help. Most of the visitors to the house had criminal records. They were also still known to be committing crimes. Jean's estranged husband, Glyn, who was 29 years old at the time of Suzanne's murder, had many convictions already, mainly for burglary and theft as well as for being drunk and disorderly. He would often visit the house and had a fairly good relationship with Jean still. Bernadette McNeely was 24 years old and already had 3 young children to look after. She was also a drug addict. She was good friends with Jean Powell. Anthony Dudson was only 17 years old. He was in an on-off relationship with Jean Powell. Jeffrey Lee was 26 years old. He had convictions for robbery already. Clifford Pook was only 18 years old and he was Jean Powell's younger brother. Clifford had also previously dated Suzanne Capper. They had only dated for a short while before splitting up. Despite the fact that Suzanne was often picked on and bullied by everyone at the house, she still seemed to enjoy going there. Or perhaps she just did not really have anywhere else to go. Her stepfather knew that criminal activity was taking place at the house, but he was not aware of the full extent of it until after his stepdaughter was murdered. Suzanne Capper, for some strange reason, did choose to spend a lot of time at the house at Langsworthy Road. However, the situation at the squalid house came to a head in December of 1992. It has been claimed that the group of people who regularly attended the house had accused Suzanne of stealing a pink duffel coat from one of them. She was also accused of passing on a sexually transmitted disease to one of the men there. How true any of this is anyone's guess. The group of people at that house were all involved with many sexual partners. They were all dirty and taking drugs and drinking a lot of alcohol. The house was dirty and the people at the house were also dirty because they did not take good care of their personal hygiene. But because of the allegations, things turned very bad in relation to 16-year-old Suzanne Capper. The actual events that would eventually lead to Suzanne's murder began on the 7th of December of 1992. Suzanne was lured to the house by Jean Powell. When they got there, Jean's estranged husband Glyn Powell and 17-year-old Anthony Dudson were waiting for her. Suzanne was apparently grabbed as soon as she arrived at the house. She was then held down while Glyn Powell shaved her head and also shaved off her eyebrows. He then placed a plastic bag over the poor girl's head. He then began hitting her in the head over and over again. Suzanne was also kicked violently by both Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely. Suzanne eventually fell to the floor and curled up in a ball to try and protect herself from all of the violence that was directed upon her. The women used a 3-foot-long wooden instrument as well as a belt to attack Suzanne Capper. Suzanne was then locked in a cupboard overnight. The next day, which was the 8th of December of 1992, she was moved to the house that Bernadette McNeely used to live at, which was number 91 Langsworthy Road. She was moved largely due to concerns that the noises and screams had upset the children at the other house. She was kept in a room downstairs and tied up. Suzanne was subjected to extreme torture over the next few days. I will not go into all of the details because the violence was extremely shocking and very upsetting. After enduring up to 7 days of torture, Suzanne Capper was finally removed from 91 Langsworthy Road. She was obviously in a very bad state. She was forced into the back of a car that one of the group of 6 had stolen. She was driven approximately 15 miles away. The group arrived at a narrow lane at a place called Weneth Low near Romilly, which is on the outskirts of Stockport. Inside the stolen car, which still contained Suzanne Capper in the boot, were Bernadette McNeely, Jean and Glyn Powell and Anthony Dudson. Suzanne was taken out of the boot and pushed down an embankment. She was semi-naked and she landed in a patch of brambles. Bernadette McNeely then proceeded to pour petrol over Suzanne Capper. Bernadette tried to ignite the petrol but had difficulty, so Glyn Powell used a lighter to ignite it fully. Unfortunately, the lighter did work to ignite the petrol that was covering poor Suzanne Capper. After a while, the group, believing Suzanne to be dead, left the scene. They returned to Jean Powell's house. When they arrived at Jean's house, Geoffrey Lee and Clifford Polk were there. Suzanne Capper was still clinging to life and she had somehow managed to scramble back up the embankment. She then staggered along the lane for about 400 metres. She then managed to find help in the form of 3 workmen who had just arrived for work near Campshall Road. The workmen, after discovering a badly burned Suzanne Capper, took her to a nearby house to get help. The house belonged to a married couple called Michael and Margaret Coop. Michael Coop immediately phoned for an ambulance and Margaret Coop gave Suzanne some water and tried to make her comfortable. She was understandably in a lot of pain. She had 80% burns to her body. Suzanne was rushed to hospital. She was able to tell her rescuers and hospital staff as well as the police what had happened to her, and she gave names and addresses of all of the people that had been involved. She was, however, in a very bad state and needed to be put into an induced coma. She never recovered and did not regain consciousness again. Suzanne Capper, who was only 16 years old, died on the 18th of December of 1992. Luckily, Suzanne had given a detailed account of what had happened and those responsible. The police officer in charge of the case was Detective Inspector Peter Hall of Greater Manchester Police. On the morning of the 14th of December, he instructed his officers to go to the house and arrest everyone that was there. The 6 people who Suzanne Capper had implicated in the torture and, at this stage, attempted murder all denied any knowledge of what had happened to her. However, the youngest person, named Anthony Dudson, after being advised by his own father to tell the truth to the police, began to talk about what had actually happened. The officers taking down the details were shocked by what the group had put poor Suzanne through. They arranged for some flowers to be sent to the hospital for her. On the 17th of December of 1992, all 6 accused people appeared before a magistrate in Manchester and were all charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. They were all remanded in custody after Suzanne Capper died. The charge of attempted murder was upgraded to murder. Thankfully, the police had lots of evidence from the various crime scenes and also testimony from not only the victim herself, but also from other people amongst the accused who were starting to talk, but namely Anthony Dudson. An inquest was held into the death of Suzanne Capper. It was held on the 8th of January of 1993. It was held at Manchester Coroner's Court. A Dr. William Lawler, who was a Home Office pathologist, testified that Suzanne Capper had suffered between 75 and 80% burns. Dr. Lawler also said that it was consistent with having had petrol thrown over her body and then set alight afterwards. He also went on to say that the chances of Suzanne Capper surviving the attack had been minimal. He explained that Suzanne's internal organs had been severely damaged as a result of the burns. The coroner stated that, quote, "It is clear that the young girl must have suffered a great deal of pain and had no chance of survival. But she did fortunately survive long enough to give information which led to the people mentioned being charged with her death, unquote. The trial started on the 16th of November of 1993 and lasted 22 days. All 6 defendants denied murder, and each of them tried to minimise his or her part in the crimes committed. Suzanne's mother Elizabeth did not attend the first day of the trial due to the details that were going to be brought up regarding the torture and murder of her daughter. Suzanne Capper's mother did attend the trial on a few occasions and also attended for the sentencing of all of the people who had been involved in ending Suzanne's life. There was a lot of evidence that was put forward at the trial. The jury did not have any trouble reaching their verdicts. Before the jury retired for deliberation, the judge, Mr. Justice Potts, directed that Clifford Polk to be cleared of murder. The jury came back with the following verdict. Bernadette McNeely was found guilty of murder and was given a life sentence with a minimum tariff of 25 years. She was also found guilty of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and received an additional 20 years on her sentence. She had pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and received another 20 years. Jean Powell was found guilty of murder. She was also given a life sentence with a minimum tariff of 25 years. She was also found guilty of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and got an additional 20 years added to her sentence. She had pleaded guilty to false imprisonment, just like her friend Bernadette had, and received another 20 years onto her sentence. Jeffrey Lee had pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and had received 12 years. He was acquitted of murder. He was also acquitted of causing grievous bodily harm. Anthony Dudson was found guilty of murder. He was detained indefinitely with a minimum tariff of 18 years. He was also found guilty of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and received an additional 15 years. He pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and received another 15 years. Clifford Polk pleaded guilty to conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and received 15 years. He also pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and received an additional 15 years. As instructed by the judge, Clifford Polk was acquitted of Suzanne Capper's murder. Glenn Powell was found guilty of murder and he received a life sentence with a minimum tariff of 25 years. He was also found guilty of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and got another 20 years. Glenn Powell was also found guilty of false imprisonment and received another 20 years. In a statement to the press after the sentencing, the police said, quote, "Psychological reports say that these are absolutely sane individuals. It's frightening that they are such ordinary people. There is nothing special about any of them," unquote. Jeffrey Lee appealed against his sentence, which ended up being reduced from 12 years to 9 years. Anthony Dudson appealed his sentence in regards to Suzanne Capper's murder, and his sentence was cut from 18 years to 16 years. He was moved to an open prison in 2009. Open prisons are prisons where a prisoner is trusted to complete their sentence with minimal supervision. They are usually not actually locked in their cells either and can actually go out to work. Yes, surprisingly, some prisoners in open prisons are allowed out to work as long as they return to the prison at the end of the day. Work opportunities have to be agreed and full disclosure is usually given to any potential employer who would have already signed up for the scheme anyway. The prisoner cannot just go and work anywhere. It has to be properly looked into, and many safeguards are put in place. An update on the status of Suzanne Capper's torturers and killers is as follows. Bernadette McNeely has already been released from prison. She was released in December of 2014. Jeffrey Lee was freed early from prison. He was released in 1998, so he hardly served any time at all. Clifford Polk was also released early. He got out in May 2001. Jean Powell and Glenn Powell, as well as Anthony Dudson, are still in prison. Quite often in prisons in England, sentences that are handed down will run concurrently. So in a way, the extra convictions can seem meaningless, in my opinion anyway. Sometimes the judges will say that the convictions, if a prisoner is convicted of more than one crime, will be served separately, but often it will be concurrently. So putting an extra 20 years onto, say, 25-year sentence it's not going to mean they're going to serve 45 years. It just seems pointless sometimes. Although only 4 of the suspects were involved in Suzanne Capper's actual murder, namely Jean and Glyn Powell, Anthony Dudson and Bernadette McNeely. They were the main ones. The other 2 suspects were at the house of Jean Powell's when they arrived back after setting fire to Suzanne Capper. The 2 men waiting, Clifford Polk and Jeffrey Lee, knew what had happened and had actually had some involvements in her torture and beatings prior to her murder. They had been actively involved for days in the torture of Suzanne and in all probability knew exactly what her fate was. So to not be convicted, although they were charged, seems wrong to me. This case is horrific, and you can only imagine the pain that the poor victim went through over such a sustained period of time. She must have been so frightened and knew that she had no way of getting away from her tormentors. Suzanne Capper tried desperately to save herself once the evil torturers had left her to die. Her rescuer said that even though she was in agony, she kept thanking them for helping her. She was also able to give a very detailed account to the police about who had done such terrible things to her and how it had all unfolded. Suzanne Capper was only 16 years old when she died. She had gone through days and days of brutal treatment before she was killed. The people who were involved were all known to her. Suzanne had already had a rough start in life and she was falling in with the wrong crowd, there's no doubt about that. But she had so much time ahead of her to potentially turn everything around and to live a happy life. She was known to be a caring girl who would help others when they needed it. Hopefully her family can rest a little knowing that at least her killers were caught. It's just a shame that only 3 of them are still in prison and the others are free to get on with their lives. I feel sorry for all of the children that were living in that awful environment as well. There were 6 of them in total. 3 were Jean and Glyn Powell's and the other 3 were Bernadette McNeely's. They were all very young at the time and hopefully did not witness too much of what went on in that awful environment. The police said that the houses, both 91 and 97, Langsworthy Road, were disgusting and there was rubbish and drugs everywhere. Hopefully these children were treated to a better life after the parents were put away. Inevitably, after everything came to light, many criticisms were levied against people that had been somehow involved with the supposed care of Suzanne Capper. Her mother was obviously criticised for her lack of care. It appeared that despite her daughter asking for help, she put her needs first. Suzanne had gone to her, but her mother had met a new man and she did not immediately help her daughter. She told Suzanne to wait a few weeks, allegedly. Her father walked out on the family and had no further involvement in Suzanne's life. Suzanne's teachers did not try hard enough, in my opinion. They knew that she was truanting, missing lots of school, but did not seem to address it properly. She had apparently turned up at school with unexplained bruises, but nothing was seemingly done to try and help her. At least she did have a good relationship, by all accounts, with her stepfather and also with her older sister, Michelle. This was such a awful case, and if you want to find out more, please be advised that some of the content is horrific. In fact, most of it is. The credits for this episode go to morbidology.com, Wikipedia, www.manchestereveningnews.co.uk, medium.com and confidentials.com. Thank you very much for listening.